Okay, it looks like most everybody that is going to join has joined. So let's go ahead and get started. Welcome to Ancestors from Abroad. My name is Sarah. I'm a librarian over at the Haggard Library, and I will be presenting this class to you tonight. In the chat, we also have Trey, who's another librarian here. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and he will be here to try and answer them or pass them along to me if he's not able to. He can also, if we need some links pasted into the chat or shared with you, he will be doing that as well. Um, just in case there's any fun thing that we want to share with y'all. Otherwise, let's get started. Talking about our ancestors from abroad. So tonight's class objectives, we're going to have, and this will be mixed throughout the presentation, but we'll have a brief history of immigration to the United States. We're going to try and learn what sort of domestic American documents might have, what information they might have about your ancestors' immigration. And we're going to learn about passenger lists and other sort of immigration records. When America is the great melting pot, and a lot of people have immigrated here. From 1783 till the end of 2019, more than 86 million immigrants have come to America. Um, the first successful English colony was in Jamestown in 1607. So even before 1783, we had people immigrating from Europe, from other places as well to the United States. So the number is even probably more than that, 86 million, but that is from that time period, at least how many people have come over. B, take a quick note that some 10 million or 20%, I believe, were lost or never recorded records when the people came over. So just because we have this many, there are still millions more that were lost or never recorded. So you have a good shot of finding some information, but just as with all genealogy research, you might not be able to find something. So the first thing we do when we do any genealogy research is to do some background research. And the first thing you're going to want to do is to identify which of your ancestors were immigrants. You want to work your way back from yourself, verifying that these are your family relations every step along the way. You don't want to just jump, even if you think you know who your immigrant ancestor was, don't jump to them immediately and start working from there. You can find information on your immigrant ancestor in other ancestors' records and information sometimes. Um, and you need all of this information to be able to trace them back to their country of origin. Just because you know a person was here at a specific time doesn't mean that's when they came over. They could have been here earlier. You just haven't found that information on them yet. Plus, having all of the basic genealogical information about your ancestor will make the rest of your immigration research easier. So what kind of things are you looking to find? First thing, first and last name. Full name, if you have a middle name as well, or even just a middle initial, that sometimes could be the detail that helps you distinguish one person on a records from your ancestor. If you can find the names of other family members or close friends, those will actually be really helpful as well. Typically, a person did not immigrate alone. They were with close friends or family. So these names might also appear on the immigration records with your ancestor or provide clues to help figure out or find more information about your ancestor. Your biographical information is going to be all of your standard birth and death, marriage kind of information, birth date, birth location, death date, death location, where they lived. Those are all good clues to where they might have immigrated from. If your family has any traditions or heirlooms, those might have a specific cultural significance that you can help trace back to whatever country of origin your ancestor is from. Religion is also a really good thing to know. Sometimes um, people would come, instead of coming over with their friends and families, they would come as part of a religious group. Sometimes churches would often sponsor people to immigrate over. So you can sometimes search in their records to help find lists of people who were brought over. Or if you think about the prominence of various religions to specific regions, it can also help narrow your search. Like, for example, if you found a record that stated your ancestor was Anglican or part of the Church of England, I'm going to likely guess that they are from England. They're not likely to be from Italy and be Anglican. They might be. It's just unlikely. So that's a good clue to kind of guide you in the right direction. And of course, be aware of name changes, just spellings, different spellings, misspellings. An agent might have heard something wrong and wrote it down differently, or your ancestor might have been semi-literate and didn't know exactly how to spell things. So just be aware that spellings might be different on different records. And if you do know generally the date of immigration or the place of departure or arrival, you can jot that information down. But even if you have it, it might not be 100% accurate or tell the full story. Sometimes the place of departure is just the closest place that they could get on a boat, or they did not stay at the place that they arrived. That was just the closest port. And then they took, trains or wagons or whatever across the country to their final location. So then when you're looking through the domestic records, you kind of you've gathered some information about your ancestor and you're searching these records to find stuff out about them. Why is it important? So as I mentioned earlier, just because you know your ancestor was here at a specific time doesn't mean that's when they came over. So for example, we had a patron that came to the Genealogy Center and claimed they knew their ancestor came over in 1841 and only wanted to search passenger lists from that year. However, we had convinced them to do a little more research and search these domestic records first. And in doing this, the ancestor was discovered on the 1840 census, and birth information confirmed his children being born in America in the late 1830s. So if this patron had only searched the 1841 passenger lists, they wouldn't have found anything, and they would have wasted valuable research time. So by doing this, you can kind of confirm the stories that you know or get more details on this. Your census, depending on what year you're looking for, is going to have a lot of great information. Some require naturalization date, arrival date and location, birthplace, and birthplace of parents. If you would like more details about censuses, we have a great class on our Plano Public Library Genealogy Center YouTube playlist. This class will be recorded or is being recorded and will be put on that playlist as well. But we have a whole class on censuses if you want specific information on what is included on each year of the census or how to search those. Birth, marriage, and death records. These details are going to help you determine if a name you find on the passenger list is the person you're looking for. Of course, we have extremely common names like Smith or Jones, but even names like McDonald, while less common than Smith or Jones, are still very common. And having the biographical details are going to help you confirm that this person that you found is your ancestor specifically. Family stories are also a really good place to find clues. Like if you have, oral traditions or histories that have been passed down through your family, or if you're lucky enough to have an ancestor's diary or photo album or scrapbooks. Sometimes your family stories could be tall tales. but there could also be kernels of truth in them as well. Um, so just worth keeping those in mind while you're doing your investigating. And then last but not least, naturalization and declaration papers. We're going to talk about these in more depth later on in the presentation, because depending on when your ancestor immigrated, there might not be naturalization documentation available. The Naturalization Act, the first one, was not passed until 1790. But then from that period until 1906, there was no centralized naturalization process. It was handled by various federal, state, and local courts. So until the Basic Naturalization Act of 1906, that started that centralized federal process, there's not anything. So if your ancestor came to the United States after that time, they're more likely to have naturalization papers, but again, that doesn't always mean that they're going to have them. You might also want to do some general research on the historical background of the country, of the time period, just historical context to help explain why your ancestor might have come to the U.S. Um, Again, this can be some confirmation of the ancestor you find too. And sometimes this background information is important when you're interpreting the information that you found on documents. For example, sometimes you can find kingdoms that no longer exist or have been incorporated into other modern countries. For example, you could see Prussia listed as their place of birth, which would be modern day Germany, or Galicia, which spans the boundaries of modern Poland and Ukraine. So you could see that as country of origin, and you're like, what? I don't know this one. This is where that historical background um, comes into play. Or a good example that I learned recently, um, Norway has been under the same crown as countries like Denmark and Sweden at multiple points in their history, and were not an independent nation until 1905. So people that we would consider Norwegian in modern parlance might have been called Swedish on records from the late 1800s. Again, you don't want to go thinking you're searching for your Swedish ancestor to find out that they've been Norwegian the whole time. So doing just that little bit of research into the historical background might help you with your research in general overall. This is specifically true for the process of immigration. Not everybody landed in Ellis Island, although a very large number did, and we will talk about that more later too. This map is an example of a German map of American ports and major cities circa 1853. So even from the 1850s and before, you have people from all sorts of different countries showing how to come to the US. So think about, in general, like immigration patterns. Are there specific, like large groups of people that are following these certain patterns? Or what is going on in the time period that could have influenced your ancestor? For example, European Jews in the 1930s fleeing Europe and fleeing the Nazis and coming to the US, or Irish and German immigrants in the early 1800s, which was 90% of the immigrants in that period were from Ireland or Germany. Um, the Irish potato famine was going on at that time, and the German revolutions of 1848 and 1849. There was a lot of unrest in that area. So many of them came over to the United States. Purchase tickets are really interesting. Like we were talking about with religious groups earlier, sometimes they would often facilitate the process of bringing people over to the US and would be the ones that purchase the tickets for the immigrants. For example, if you've ever seen the movie Brooklyn or read the book by Colm Toibin, and I'm sure I'm saying that wrong, but um, famous Irish author, it shows the story of a young woman coming to the US from Ireland with the help of a priest and a Catholic church from the United States. They're the ones that facilitated the entire process of bringing her over. We also have purchase tickets for immigrants coming over to work for a specific person, like an indentured servitude. So the employer is the one that purchased the ticket. The Contract Labor Act of 1864 is actually the one that allowed private employers to recruit foreign workers, pay their transportation costs, and then contract their labor. So you can kind of think about it like if somebody was sponsoring your visa nowadays, that's kind of what these employers were doing. You can look for some of these records in the United States and in the country of origin. We'll get into a little more detail about that later. And again, like we talked about earlier, there are names and misspellings are very common. You have heard the common tale of the immigration agent looking at the foreign name and saying, no, you're Jones now. That is not actually the case. So often, either the immigrant themselves would change it to make it more Americanized, or the immigration agent could be unfamiliar with the name and is attempting to spell it just very incorrectly. Or maybe it's a translation of the name in its original language. So the American name Black might have been changed from the German name Schwarz, which means black in English. So um, think about that when you're thinking about this process of immigration too. What are things that could have happened and changed along the way? And here's a fun little map showing immigration patterns in like the 90s. So you can see there's some very specific patterns of groups of people that moved um, different ways. And years kind of, again, gives you that historical context. Like a lot of people leaving Vietnam in the mid 1970s. As we all know, the Vietnam War was going on during that time period. So a lot of people left at that time. It's like just because we talk about immigration, it's still happening throughout all time periods, not just back in like Ellis Island times. Okay, any questions so far, or are we ready to talk about passenger lists?
No questions at the moment.
Excellent. Okay. Yeah, remember if you have anything or want me to re-explain something, you can just pop it in the chat. I am happy to do that for you. Okay, so passenger lists. You've done all of your background research. You have a pretty good idea of who your ancestor that immigrated over was and details about their life, and kind of the historical background of why they might have come over. Now you need to look for passenger lists. They are also known as passenger manifests, if you see them listed like that. And these are just going to be lists that have the names and then some other information about everybody that was brought over on the ship. So where do we find these? Oftentimes they're going to be found at the ports along the route, the ports of embarkation, the ports of arrival. You can find them in newspapers at the same ports of embarkation and arrival as well. Sometimes they would post those in the local newspapers. If you can find the specific ship's manifest versus the port that they came in, sometimes the ships would keep them themselves or in the ship's log. You can look for the person who chartered the ship, like we were talking about, if the church or like a society brought the group of immigrants over or a government agency, those people might keep the record of who all were passengers. And sometimes it gets included in the ship's medical records. If somebody had an emergency or needed attention from the ship's doctor, then that would be included. Their name would be included in the medical records. So passenger lists have changed over the course of the nation. So pre 1820, there were no rules. Passenger lists were not always kept, and immigrants were treated more as a cargo, not as passengers themselves. If you were trying to search pre 1820, the best thing you can do is to search for specifically the manifest list, the cargo lists of ships versus trying to find a passenger list. That's just going to be a more detailed and complicated process. Because again, those weren't even required as well. But if you're going to find something from that time period, that's likely where you will find it. Individual colonies would manage their own immigration. There wasn't a federal system. So some of these colonies had lists of people coming, but they might not have information on the ship's name that they were coming across on or the date of arrival, different things like that. Even if you find the list, you might not be able to find that information. Then there's always the question of the accuracy of the lists that the colonies had versus who actually came over. A fun little fact, though, is that immigrants in the colony signed in the order of importance, with the leaders signing first. So if you do find a colony's lists and you find your ancestor up near the top of that list, your ancestor was very important. And that's pretty neat. That's a good thing to know. Lists could be also maintained by the country of departure. Spain, France, Netherlands, England were all very popular um, countries that were sending immigrants over at that time period. And then, of course, individual colonies or the port cities, if not by the ships themselves. For this time period, though, I will say you are more likely to find information in other sources like deeds and probates, death records, court records, stuff like that, versus passenger lists. But there are still some out there from this period. If you are going to look for them, I would start looking at the National Archives and Records Administration. That's where a lot of these passenger lists are going to be found. And they are on microfilm. And we'll talk about more about the National Archives a little bit later. So in 1819, the Steerage Act was passed that required captains of vessels to submit a list of all passengers on their ship to the collector of customs at the port of entry. It meant people aren't cargo anymore. Um, so things post 1820 really kind of change. And then there's two main periods that we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about customs passenger lists, which happened from about 1820 to 1891, and then immigration passenger lists from 1891 to 1957. So these are going to be the first time that we had government oversight into the immigrants and who is coming into the United States. So the customs passenger lists, not custom passenger lists, they are not unique. They are from customs. It was a duty of the U.S. Customs Service. We had 101 ports throughout the 19th and earliest 20th century, and crossing stations from Canada and Mexico as well, if they were not a port. That's a lot. That's many different places. And lists exist for these major and minor ports. You can see our major ports in alphabetical order over here, and this lovely illustration that I found on the right-hand side. New York, like I was saying earlier, not everybody came through New York. A vast majority, if your ancestors came over through this time period, probably came through New York. You can see 22 million people from 1821 to 1914 compared to 2 million in Boston, the next largest city. So you're probably going to look in New York if your ancestor came in this period, but just be aware, you might not. You can look other places. We also did have minor ports. Um, the great port of Galveston had a solid number of people come through. Or again, depending on the time period, San Francisco had a lot of Chinese and Asian immigrants come through. to do working on the railroads or for like the gold rush and stuff like that. So if you're of Asian descent, you probably might check the Port of San Francisco compared to the Port of New York. Just things to consider. These are going to be digitized and found at the National Archives and Records Administration. They have a list of the ports and the years that are covered. Some of these that have been digitized can also be found on Ancestry or Family Search, but NARA is going to be the one that holds the majority of these records. Okay, so what did these passenger lists look like? What information did they include? Well, so in the beginning, these passenger lists would include the name of the ship and the shipmaster, the port of embarkation, where they departed from, the port of arrival, and the date of arrival. And then each passenger would have their name, their age, their sex, their occupation, and their nationality. And we can see an example over here on the right-hand side. Very just basic information, but we can see that these passengers came from Bremen, Germany. And then Southampton, England, I believe is what the manifest says. And we can see their ages. You can see, yeah, most are from Germany. Some are from the United States. Just cool little details that you can find about your ancestors. So things kind of continued like this until about later into the 1800s after the Civil War. Um, in 1875, the Page Act was passed, which was the first restrictive federal immigration law in the U.S. There were several state and other laws that were passed during like the 30s and 40s. Um, but this was the first time that the federal government really stepped in to restrict immigration. The Page Act prohibited the entry of Asian immigrants perceived as coming for lewd and immoral purposes or being coerced into immigrating, and it was specifically applied to women. It was then a few years later in 1882 when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed, which was a ban on Chinese laborers immigrating to the United States. There were ways that non-laborers who sought entry to the United States, such as diplomatic officers, were supposed to be able to obtain certification from the Chinese government to prove that they were qualified to immigrate. But this really became really difficult, and very few people, even with the provisions, could enter the country under the 1882 law. Um, in 1943, it was repealed. All exclusion acts were, but from 1882 until 1943, they were in place. So again, this is just knowing like if you had an Asian immigrant ancestor coming over, it's unlikely that they came over during this time period. So that's just like good historical information to know to understand why you might not be able to find information during this time period. And then same year in 1882, they also passed an Immigration Act that excluded any person that was a convict, lunatic, idiot, or person likely of becoming a public charge. I mean, they could have no money, and that the state would have to take care of them. They'd become a ward of the state. Any person like that could be excluded as well. And then they also passed a tax on each citizen arriving at the port of entry to try and defray some costs of implementing these immigration laws. So with all these changes going on, especially 1870s and 1880s, they eventually, in 1891, passed the Immigration Act that established the Office of Immigration and Immigration Service within the Treasury Department. And then they started passing all sorts of different immigration acts of different years. So I'm going to touch on a couple of them. If you're really interested in the history of this and all the different immigration acts, um, the National Archives website has some really, really interesting stuff that I was reading up on while I was going over this presentation. They also have examples of passenger manifests from all sorts of different time periods, so you can kind of see the changes that were made during different time periods. But I've kind of listed some of the important ones out as they pertain to passenger lists. So in 1893, an act was passed that required listing immigrants in, and this is the official term, convenient groups. This was interpreted by immigration service officers to be members of the same family or those coming from the same town or village, and they could have no more than 30 names per page. So, like we were talking about earlier, if you know the names of close friends or family that might have traveled with your ancestor, you can look for them, especially if they came after 1893, because they might be in one of those convenient groups and included on the same page in the passenger lists. In 1917, there was an Immigration Act that mandated all the forms' size, color, quality of paper, and set English as the language for all manifests. So again, we're just trying to standardize, make it easier, make it standardized across all the United States, so easier to find stuff. And I'll throw in a fun, in 1903, there was an Immigration Act that was also known as the Anarchist Exclusion Act. This is because I believe an American-born son of Polish immigrants assassinated President William McKinley. So then Congress acted and said, no anarchists. You cannot come to the United States if you are an anarchist. So when you see, I'll point it out when we look at naturalization documents later, you have to verify that you are not an anarchist nor a polygamist. Okay, so we kept passing different acts and we added a lot of information to these passenger lists. So you can see from 1819, when we were still doing the customs passenger lists, we had just very few categories that would be included. When it became immigration passenger lists in 1891, they added the last residence where you lived before you came to the US and where your final destination in the US was going to be. So, like we were saying earlier, they might have come into a specific port, but that might just have been the closest port and not where they were actually going to end up. So then now, as of 1891, we might be able to find out where they were going. In 1903, they added a whole lot of more information to these lists, including whether you were a polygamist or an anarchist, because they said, no, you can't do that anymore. Not in our country. Uh, if you have a relative or a friend at a destination who you were coming over to meet, who paid for your passage over, all of this sort of information was added on. So depending on at what time period your ancestor immigrated over, they might have a lot of information or they might have some just basic information. And then two more times in 1907, we added if you had a relative or a friend in the home country. And in 1917, we actually added a personal description and place of birth. Okay, any questions so far?
None so far.
Still none.
Almost,
Okay.
always wish somebody would say hi just to make sure this thing's working.
Yeah, I was like, tell Trey hi. He's feeling lonely. Okay, but while you do, we're going to move on and we are going to talk about some of the specific New York immigration facilities. Um, so as I've said many times, not everyone that came to the US came through New York, but a vast majority did. So we're going to focus on them for a second. From 1624 until late 1855, there was no real receiving station specifically for immigrants in the US. But in 1855, on August 1st, they opened Castle Garden to be the first facility dedicated entirely to the welfare of immigrants coming to America. Um, and they ran from 1855 until 1890. So that's, I can do math, 35 years that people were coming through Castle Garden. So even if your ancestor came through New York, they might not have come through Ellis Island if they came during this time period. They would have come through Castle Garden. Um, let's see, the last year for which data was recorded, 8 million of the almost 11 million immigrants who entered the United States, which was about 75% of them, passed through Castle Garden. And it is now known as the Castle Clinton National Monument, and you can go to Battery Park in New York and go visit it. This image on the left is an illustration from 1871. So during the time period that Castle Garden was operating. So this is probably what it would have looked like on a day when people were coming through and immigrating. Uh, in my research, I also learned that it was one of the US's first beer gardens and was also an aquarium at some point. So it's fun. What a versatile building. Then throughout the rest of the 1800s and early 1900s, immigration in New York really passed between two facilities, between Barge Office and Ellis Island. So let's talk about Ellis Island specifically for a minute. It's estimated that about 12 million immigrants came through Ellis Island, and most of them, it took about 3 hours for them to be processed. By 1892, we've gotten pretty standardized and familiar with the process because they'd been doing this for a few years now. And most immigrants kind of knew what to expect, either from friends or family that had immigrated or reading stories maybe in the newspaper of people immigrating. But anxiety and disorientation did happen because they were worried. It's still a stressful process. And again, this is where sometimes maybe name misspellings came up. Uh, they might have been nervous and, misspelled something or, said something wrong, maybe got a date wrong because they were nervous. So, give your ancestors a little slack. Um, you can also, oh, I did learn, I did not know this until getting prepared for this class, but many people traveling internationally would depart and come back through Ellis Island as well. So they might have been counted multiple times in that estimate of, we said 86 million have come over, depending on how many times they had left the country and came back. So if you've ever traveled internationally and you have to come back and do customs, they would do customs at Ellis Island. Even if you were a US citizen, you would kind of have to go through it there, which was very interesting. I did not know that.
We do have a question
Yes.
before we
Okay,
get
I'll go back.
too much further. I think it was
Sure.
low shortly before this one. If could touch upon the Irish immigration from around 1871. Not exactly sure what context.
Um, yeah, whoever asked the question, I was like, did I speak? We kind of talked about it just like 1840s, the potato famine is when a lot of people came over specifically. During the 70s, I don't think I have any specific information right now, but if you could clarify the question in the chat, I can see if I can provide more of an answer. It's like, and while we're waiting for if there's some clarification, I'll go ahead and move on and we'll keep talking and then we can come back in a little bit. I'll see what I can say. So post 1957, um, there is immigration information and passenger lists available. However, Um, we do, the National Archives does keep them restricted due to personally identifiable information for 75 years. This is very similar to what we do with the census records. Um, they are specifically, we do have National Archives branches around the US, but these are at the ones in Washington, D.C. They are microfilm only. All of the paper records were not retained. Um, they were filmed by the Immigration and Naturalization Service, uh, but are now kept at the National Archives. And unfortunately, due to the very fragile nature of the original camera negative film, the access to the microfilm is limited until it can be transferred to a more suitable format. And they are in the process of transferring the microfilm to digital, and anything that is digitized will eventually be available via the National Archives catalog. So always worth going to their website and kind of digging around and seeing what they do have. Um, if you would like to access some of this information post 1957, it must be requested through a Freedom of Information Act, and there will be information all about that on the National Archives website, and they will help you. The librarians and archivists there are very helpful and will do what they can to help you get that information. Okay, do we get more clarification on that question or any other questions before I move on?
Yeah, I'm just slow typing. Um, that might be actually something we need to cover through our genealogy at plano.gov email. You can ask us questions, more detailed queries on researching or something specific.
Yeah, if you have specific questions about your ancestors, like maybe you've done some research on these passenger lists before and you've kind of hit a brick wall, you can always email us at genealogy@plano.gov. That'll send it to our genealogy team, and then we can get into more specifics. Okay. Okay, some quick other considerations while you are searching for your ancestors in these lists. Births and deaths en route where documentation was not required by law. So sometimes they could be captured in the ship's or the captain's logs, and sometimes they may have been tacked on at the end of your passenger lists, but oftentimes they just were not documented. Same thing for stowaways. You could have had them added to the end of the list, or sometimes if they were caught, they were became a part of the crew, and so you might actually find them on the crew lists as well. I really love this illustration that I found, searching for stowaways. So making sure nobody is snuck on board. And then passengers were sometimes sent back. As we talked about earlier, anybody that was going to be that the immigration agents believed was likely to become a public charge, they had no money or they seemed very sickly or ill, they would get sent back. So your ancestor might have been on the passenger list. They might have come over, but you can't find them anywhere else. They might have been returned. They might have been sent back to their home country. They would also, there was a habit of if a woman was traveling single and nobody came to pick them up, they determined that they were unsuitable to be in this country by themselves, and they would send those women back as well. The lists are arranged sometimes when you'll find them by port of arrival and then chronologically. But just as with most records, there's a solid anywhere from 10 to 40% of the passenger lists or names of people that came to the US are missing. So, yeah, while there's a good likelihood if your ancestor came over during this time period that you'll be able to find them in passenger lists, there's also a good chance that you will not. So, once you've searched passenger lists, if you can't find anything or you even want more information, another place to look is the naturalization records. Naturalization is just the legal procedure of becoming a citizen of a state or a country. Normally, all of this paperwork is completed many years after your arrival, sometimes 5 years or longer. Um, but a lot of people, up to 25%, did not become naturalized. So, oh, and for a long period of time, as we talked about, there is no centralized location for these records. In addition to all of that, since it's been so many years after arrival, typically that people would do these forms, they might not have all of the paperwork from arrival when they're completing it. And then they start guessing at dates or places, things like that. So again, just because you find this information doesn't mean that it's necessarily all going to be 100% accurate. You can find naturalization records in the courts. I mean, on all different levels from federal, municipal, there can be marine courts, criminal courts, police courts that might include naturalization records, libraries, museums, historical societies, or some are even on online databases now. Um, this could have more clues on it, though, than what you know. For example, your ancestor could have gotten married between the time that they landed in the ports and when they started their declaration. So now you have information about their spouse, where they were born, all of that, where they lived, all of that sort of stuff. You can, oh, before I move on to homestead records, so our beautiful example on the right here is the Declaration of Intention from Albert Einstein. He came over, if you look at the dates, I believe it says he came over in 1935, and he actually was doing his petition in 1936 is when it got done. So he was on top of it, and he decided to get naturalized pretty much immediately. Um, oh, and I mentioned if you look at the bottom paragraph that's right above his photo, uh, he in there is talking about this is where it says, I am not an anarchist, I am not a polygamist, nor a believer in the practice of polygamy, and it is my intention in good faith to become a citizen of the United States of America and to reside permanently therein. So they made you say it on your declarations of intention um, and all of your naturalization records. Homestead records. So, in starting with the Homestead Act of 1862, that offered land grants to both U.S. citizens and then immigrants who were eligible for naturalization and who are willing to settle and develop the land for 5 years. Um, they included all sorts of information, including like affidavits of friends and family that are like, yeah, this person's a good person. They'll be able to. Um, Settle the land and till it and make it profitable, or they will build a house and they will be a great American citizen. And it has a lot of information of where they came from and things like that. Like I mentioned with the census class earlier, we do also have a land records class, and it is recorded and on our Plano Public Library YouTube channel. So if you want more information on how to find homestead records, what sort of information is included in there, um, please watch that class. And then last but not least, I'm going to give a shout out to the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, formerly known as the Balch Institute for Ethnic Studies. They merged with the Historical Society of Pennsylvania back in 2002. They have a lot of general genealogy and family history materials, but they do specifically have an ethnic history resources section. This has a lot of ethnic newspapers that they've digitized or have indexes of their records and publications of ethnically based organizations, societies, um, groups, churches, things like that. Um, and they also have immigrants' families' letters, diaries, photos, scrapbooks, all sorts of really cool stuff. So if you say, oh, my German family, oh, my Italian family, they have different sections and pages for those sort of different ethnic groups. So highly recommend looking around that and playing around there. Okay, so what sort of resources do we have? Once you've gotten some information about your ancestors' immigration journey, come visit us at the Genealogy Center, and we have some books and resources that might help. If you know some basic facts, we have a book example here on the right called the Passenger and Immigration List Index. They're also known as the Philby books after author P. William Philby. We also have books based on specific nationalities like Germans to America, Italians to America, Polish to America, English to America, that will have lists of passengers as well. If you know the sort of group that they came over or the place of the settlement, there's books such as Swiss Pioneers of Southeastern Ohio. That's very specific. If you knew you had a Swiss ancestor who then moved to Southeastern Ohio, you might want to check a book like that. And then we also have books from like the ports of arrival. So we have ships passenger lists from the port of Galveston, Texas. You can always search the Plano Public Library catalog. Anything that we have in the genealogy collection is searchable in the catalog, and you can find it there. And then you'll just have to come in and visit us to use the books. You can also search um, databases or places like WorldCat to see if there are even books on the subject or the topic that you're looking for. You can also, if even if we don't have the item, you can search through our interlibrary loan catalog as well to see if anybody has it in the area, and we can try and get those brought over so you can use them. And of course, some of this information is available through Ancestry or Family Search, and the Genealogy Center has access to Ancestry Library Edition here in building if you have your library card. Family Search you can access from home, but the Genealogy Center is a Family Place affiliate library, or I'm sorry, a Family Search affiliate library. So if you come in and use it in our building, then you'll have more access than you do from home. And a good general reminder, if you're finding a name in the indexes, um, you want to use the facts you found from your background research to corroborate your find. It's just an index too, so you're going to want to try and track down that original record if possible. And then once you've confirmed that this is your ancestor, you can start looking for information then in their country of origin. Yeah, it's like sometimes you might find a William McDonald, but that is a pretty popular name. So if you can, again, have like a birth information or you see the names of his sons with him as well, if you can match multiple pieces of those information to this index record, then the more likely it is to be your ancestor. And then again, because if the name's misspelled wrong doesn't mean it's not them, too. Just take all of your general genealogy research tips, and of course, those still all apply to your research here.
Sarah, we have a quick question. I don't know the
Sure.
answer since you've looked at these. There's a question: is the passenger immigration list index, is there a certain date range on these?
I'm not sure. I can look up and see if there is. I believe it is just going to be like that same sort of time period, probably through the early 1900s. But I'm not certain. So let me see if I can find out.
You know, are you looking in the catalog? I was fixing to pull it up and see if it lists it.
It looks like from what I'm seeing, it says the 1500s to the 1900s, perhaps. Yes. From what I see, that's kind of, yeah, 1500s through the 1900s, but I don't have exact dates on that.
Another good reason to come visit us.
Exactly. We can all find out together. We'll learn something new. Any other questions?
And we did have an earlier question, really good question. Let me see if I can find it here in my list. Oh, is there anything to help, um, with finding ancestors who were here in the 17th century prior to the country being founded?
So there still might be some um, passenger lists or documentation. This is where I'd probably look with like the individual colonies. Um, it's going to be, they'll probably be depending on, again, where they came from, but they are coming to a British colony, likely. Um, again, because we said um, Jamestown was settled. That was the first successful colony, and that was 1607. So it might be in some British records. It might be in the like colonial states, whichever those are. Sometimes it just might be you're thinking you have to think outside of the box, and it would be diaries of people that came over, that sort of information. But it's one of those because it wasn't standardized, because there wasn't a process for it. It's kind of, you got to get creative in doing the research for that. That help answer the question some? Hope so. Okay. That's all I have. Um, Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we hope to see you at some of our upcoming programs. We do have a DNA forum that is done by, I believe, Genealogy Friends, and that'll be on Tuesday, April 8th. They do in person and online. If you would like to go online, you'll just register over the Zoom, same way you did for this class. Otherwise, you're welcome to come. They'll be here in person at the Haggard Library in the Genealogy Center. We are also doing a courthouse research class on Tuesday, April 22nd. Um, Again, online like this class, register through our calendar. And then we have how to join the DAR hosted by our local DAR chapter, which will be in person on Saturday, April 26th. So if I can hang around for a couple of minutes and answer any more questions if we have any other come through. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we look forward to seeing you at our next classes.
I just see a question here that I just now saw pop up.
Hmm.
Um, the answer is we're gonna have
Or I
a
guess what's the
genealogy.
question?
Oh, it's I was answering it out loud. The genealogy librarians are there's a number of us on the team, so your likelihood of you catching us is good. And sometimes we work weekends, so it just depends. Um,
I say we do, if you're looking for specific help from a genealogy librarian, my best recommendation is if Trey, if you can find the link and pop this in the chat, you can do a book a genealogy librarian where we can have a half an hour one-on-one um, with you and kind of go over whatever your specific brick wall is. Um, you can go through the library's website, through the Genealogy Center page, and on that page, there will be a form where you can request the book of genealogy librarian. So that's probably your best bet uh, to get one of us. So we can schedule a meeting and put it on our calendars and have that time set aside for you. All right, we'll hang around for another couple of minutes in case we get any other questions. Um, Again, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yeah, I was typing some more link to the Genealogy Center, and on the Genealogy Center, you can find the research assistant, as that has the links to the Ask a Genealogy Librarian and the Book a Genealogy Librarian options.
Yeah, or you can always email us at
Genealogy at plano.gov.
yep, and we can try and answer you that way. But either way, through the form or through that, and we can help.
All right, cool. Thanks everybody for joining us tonight.
Oh, say you haven't heard back from the Book of Genealogy librarian. Yeah, send us an email at genealogy@plano.gov. Let us know that you were in this class tonight. and kind of what your question was, and we'll try and get back to you sooner. All right, you're welcome, and have a wonderful night, everybody.